Want to welcome Senator Bo Hatchett. Senator Hatchett from Georgia, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today on Marsy's Law is Why We Do What We Do interview series.
And thank you for having me. It's my honor to be here.
Well, Senator Hatchett, just to put things in perspective for the people who are watching, you are at the Capitol right now. You are, I think, in day 39 of a 40-day legislative session. So we understand how busy you are. To the people who are watching, we may have to cut this a little bit short because of the fact that you are being called to different rules committee hearings and so forth. So we totally understand. I'm going to try to get right into it. Why We Do What We Do, as you know, is the interview series where we highlight leaders across the country who are in the corner of victims and survivors and their families, like you have been. As you know, Marsy's Law passed in your great state of Georgia in 2018, overwhelmingly with 80% of the vote. Not a bad victory margin. I think there were over 3 million statewide votes for the passage of Marsy's Law, which enshrined equal and enforceable and meaningful constitutional rights for victims in the Georgia state constitution. One thing that you know is when we pass Marsy's Law in any particular state, we don't just leave, we keep a presence in a state. And the reasons why we do that is so we can continue to support survivors and victims, help them implement Marsy's Law statewide, but also try to get behind great policy initiatives and great legislation that are introduced by friends of victims and friends of survivors in the legislature, like you are. Most recently, you were the primary sponsor of a bill called the Criminal Records Responsibility Act in Georgia, which Marsy's Law for Georgia helped and supported with you and with Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan. Can you tell us a little bit about the problem that you saw, Senator Hatchett, and how this goes about addressing it? And tell us a little bit, people talk about bipartisan support. Tell us a little bit about how this passed in the state Senate.
Yeah, in the state of Georgia right now, we have a criminal database, and for a number of different reasons, some that are hard to pinpoint exactly, there were 7 million charges in the state of Georgia that did not have final dispositions. Meaning, you're charged with a crime, you may have been prosecuted, found guilty, but the final disposition of the case was not updated. And it also worked the other way. If you may have been charged and you were found innocent, the database was not updated. So you had all these outstanding charges, which number one is a problem because of the backlog in general. But if you were charged again, a judge at a sentencing hearing would not have accurate data to see what your criminal past was like. If you applied for a job or applied for housing and a background check was run, they would not have accurate information. And that was a huge problem, a public safety concern, and honestly, a concern for victims in the state of Georgia as far as notification goes. And that is something that we addressed and tackled. And I think that bill, we had 56 of 56 senators sign it. And this session, it was the only one to have every member in our chamber sign. It passed unanimously, has gotten a ton of support. It's over in the House now and will hopefully be passed out. But I think the point in bringing that up and saying that, we had 56 signers, so the entire chamber, just shows you how good of a policy it is and how it's not a partisan policy, how it is a needed bill. It's a problem, and hopefully with what we're doing in Senate Bill 441, we're going to get that fixed not only now, but prevent it from happening again in the future.
Yeah, and it's so important. I mean, it goes right back to the beginning of Marsy's Law and why Marsy's Law was created. Marsy Nicholas was a victim of murder, and her family members, Dr. Nicholas, her brother, and her mom, were not notified when the perpetrator was actually released, which led to ultimately the formation of Marsy's Law. And timely notification of a victim's release is so important and so crucial for the peace of mind of a victim's family to have an idea that that the perpetrator may in fact be out in the public as opposed to being held.
And I could not agree more. And, so many people want to be tough on crime, but they're so laser focused on the charging and the prosecution. And, you've got to have advocates that realize, yes, it is important to prosecute. It is important to be tough on crime, but, there are victims out there, and you've got to focus on them too, because, when those criminals are released, how important it is to notify them and keep them a part of the process, because ultimately, their lives were changed because of the criminals, and it doesn't stop when someone's found guilty. You've got to follow up, and that's why I am a proud supporter of Marsy's Law, and thank you for all your efforts that you're doing around the country and here in Georgia.
No, I appreciate it. Right back at you, Senator. And one of the things that you and I have talked about is the fact that you are an advocate for victims and survivors, but you're also an advocate by extension for equal justice under the law. And a lot of times when we go to different states to introduce Marsy's Law and the concept of Marsy's Law, one of the things that we'll get a lot of times from the defense bar is that they think that if you're trying to enshrine victims' rights into the state constitution, that you may in some way be lessening or taking away defendants' constitutional rights, under the assumption that constitutional rights are a zero-sum game. You understand, and one of the reasons why you were such a supporter of Marsy's Law from the beginning is that's not the case at all. It's really just trying to level the playing field. And you really walk the walk when it comes to leveling the playing field. And it's like you talked about how this passed 56-0 in the state Senate. It goes to the fact that when people actually understand the concept of victims' rights and what we're trying to accomplish here, it really transcends politics. This is not a partisan issue at all. This is a human issue. And one of the bills that somebody in your district, is it District 50 that you represent in the state Senate?
Yep, Senate District 50.
Yeah, and one of the bills, one of the House members just introduced a bill that passed in the House, and you're going to be the sponsor of it in the Senate, that you're actually trying to advocate in this bill for equal pay for public defenders. Tell us a little bit about that and what the problem is you're trying to address in the state of Georgia there. Once again, under the concept of trying to level the playing field of equal justice for all.
Right. And what we are doing is we're making the pay for a public defender equal to the pay of a DA. And then it goes down in tiers for however many years you've served for assistant public defenders and assistant district attorneys. And the idea there is, I'm an attorney, and other attorneys or people would know if you'd much rather go up against someone who's good than someone who is not. And the discrepancy in pay was really discouraging people from getting into that field, and having skilled attorneys and retaining them on both sides ultimately makes it better for everyone. And like you said, levels the playing field and makes sure that things are done properly and correctly throughout the state of Georgia. And I think this is a step in the right direction to assure that constitutional rights are being protected. And we're looking forward to hopefully getting this bill out of my Rules Committee here in about 10 minutes. I'm going to go be presenting that bill, and we'll be asking for it to be on the floor tomorrow.
Yeah, and tomorrow's the last day. I think you're expected to be there until about midnight tomorrow night. Is that
actually,
right?
So today is a committee day, and so we have all our committee hearings getting bills to the floor. So tomorrow is actually day 39, and Monday is sine die, or the final day. But we'll be in till midnight tomorrow, and probably again till midnight on Monday.
And another area that you have focused on, and I know that you have voted in favor of several bills that aim to protect victims of human trafficking. Could you tell us a little bit about that issue in Georgia and what you're trying to do to help human trafficking victims?
Yeah, so I'm also a floor leader for Governor Kemp, and one of his initiatives was to combat the human trafficking that we see in Georgia. Georgia's home to the busiest airport in the world, and it is actually a hub for sex trafficking, human trafficking. And through several initiatives last year, we have passed bills that help victims tremendously. And I think one of the bills that we passed out last year that I think is very impactful is in the state of Georgia, when you changed your name, you had to run it in the paper that you were changing your name. So that I think the policy behind it was if you had outstanding debt with someone, they could see that you're changing your name. But the danger with that is when you have victims of domestic violence or victims of any crime that in order to protect themselves decide to change their name so it makes it less likely that they're found, they would have to publicize it. So what we did was we carved out an exception where if you were a victim of domestic violence or human trafficking, you could actually change your name anonymously without having to publicize that. And I think that was a very strong bill and a big bill, a bill that supports victims and helps, further our goals of making Georgia a safer place and a place where we support victims.
And another area where you, like I've described to you, where you really walk the walk when it comes to helping victims. When you and I started to get to know each other, I realized that you and your wife, Ashley, actually worked with a group that empowers victims and survivors of domestic violence called Circle of Hope in Georgia. And I think they're located right in your district.
Yes, they are. And we have, been a partner of theirs for a long time. They do a lot of really good work. And I didn't realize how needed these charities are. Because when you're a victim of domestic violence, the hardest thing to do is to get away. And what they do is they provide shelter and resources for women who are trying to get away from an abusive relationship. My wife is an attorney as well and actually represents the Circle of Hope's victims regularly. And we had apartments that we rented out that we actually allowed Circle of Hope to use several of them as shelters for victims of domestic violence. And I know there are charities like them all across the state and all across the country. And, they advocate for victims and we try to do everything we can to help them.
Yeah, well, you really lead you lead by example and you lead with a servant's heart. You really are the definition of what public service is all about. It's clear from my getting to know you that you work not just in your law firm, but then you're racing to the Capitol and then you're racing back home, and then it doesn't even end there. Like you just mentioned the example of opening up property that you own for domestic violence victims and survivors. I understand that you're under a time crunch, and your chief of staff was jumped on beforehand and let me know what your schedule was. So I want to be very mindful of that. I just want to thank you very much, Senator Hatchett, for all you do for victims and for survivors. And we always like to have, it's kind of like Jeopardy when you come back after the break and they get to know a little fun story about some of the contestants. And I'd like to do that a little bit in some of these interviews. And one of the things, I don't want to embarrass you, that some people may not know about you, but they probably do in the state of Georgia, is that you were the quarterback at, is it Habersham Central?
Yeah, Habersham Central High School, many moons ago.
But not many moons ago, to the extent that you still, I believe, have hold 5 records as a quarterback for Habersham Central High School: most completions, most attempts, most passing yards, most touchdowns in a single game. You threw for 5 touchdowns in one game, and most touchdowns in your career. You threw for 50 touchdowns, which matches the Senate district that you now represent.
I have not made that connection, but yeah, that was fun times. Had a good team and learned a lot of valuable lessons out on the field.
Yeah, well, it's extending now. You still work hard. You're still winning, and I really want to thank you for all that you do, all that you continue to do, and all that you have done and continue to do to support Marsy's Law and victims in Georgia and throughout the country.
Well, I appreciate you having me on, and if I can ever come back on and maybe give you an update after this bill passes and how it impacts the state, I'd love to. And just thank you for having me on. And if I can do anything, please let me know.
That's great, and we wish you luck in getting that CRRA, Criminal Records Responsibility Act, passed in the House.
Thank you very much. I'm going to need it.
Thanks so much, Senator. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.